The babysitter we'd trusted for 6 years texted, "Check the cloud storage on your home computer. Your husband has been recording the kids and selling the videos." I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of my accounting firm when the text came through from Natalie. She'd been our babysitter since our oldest son was 2, had watched all 3 of our kids grow up, had eaten dinner at our table hundreds of times. The text made no sense. I read it 3 times trying to find an interpretation that wasn't horrifying, that wasn't suggesting my husband Michael had been exploiting our children, but the words didn't change. I called Natalie immediately and she answered on the first ring, her voice shaking. "I'm so sorry. I should have told you sooner. I didn't know what to do." I asked her what she was talking about, what she'd found, and she took a breath that sounded painful. She explained she'd been using our home computer that morning to print her college application essays while Michael was at the gym and the kids were at school. She'd opened the wrong folder by accident and found videos, hundreds of them. Our children bathing, changing clothes, sleeping, being filmed through angles that made it clear the recordings were deliberate and hidden. Natalie had clicked through several files before she understood what she was seeing. The videos were organized in folders by child and by activity. There were pricing documents, transaction records showing payments received through cryptocurrency accounts, customer usernames, and delivery confirmations. Michael had been running a child exploitation business from our home computer, monetizing our children's privacy and bodies for buyers who wanted illegal content. Natalie's voice cracked as she explained she'd spent the past hour trying to decide whether this was something she was misunderstanding, whether there was any innocent explanation. But the folder names were explicit. The transaction amounts were significant. The customer communications were clear about what was being purchased. There was no misunderstanding possible. Michael had been selling videos of our kids to predators for years, and Natalie had just discovered the evidence. I felt physically sick, my vision tunneling as I tried to process what Natalie was telling me. I asked if she'd told anyone else, and she said no, that she'd texted me immediately after seeing the files. I told her to leave our house now, to not touch anything else on the computer, to go somewhere safe and wait for me to call her back. I sat in my car for 5 minutes trying to organize my thoughts and failing. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. Michael was home right now, probably returned from the gym, unaware that Natalie had found the evidence. Our kids were at school. I was 15 minutes from home. I needed to see the computer myself before I did anything else, needed to verify what Natalie had described because my brain was rejecting the possibility that my husband of 12 years, the father of my children, could be a predator. I drove home on autopilot, barely registering traffic or stoplights. Michael's car was in the driveway. I walked through the front door and found him in the kitchen making lunch, looking completely normal in his gym clothes, hair damp from the shower, humming something while he made a protein shake. He smiled when he saw me and asked why I was home early. I told him I wasn't feeling well and needed to check something on the computer. Michael's smile faltered slightly and he asked what I needed to check. I said work files and walked toward our home office before he could ask more questions. The computer was still on, exactly as Natalie had left it. The folders were there, exactly as she'd described. I clicked through files with mounting horror, seeing my 8-year-old daughter Emma in the bathtub, seeing my 6-year-old son Lucas getting dressed in his bedroom, seeing my 10-year-old son Caleb sleeping in bed, all filmed from angles that showed Michael had positioned cameras in places we'd never notice. Bathroom exhaust fans, bedroom smoke detectors, stuffed animals on shelves. He'd been systematic and patient, building a content library that he'd cataloged and priced. The transaction records went back 4 years, hundreds of sales, tens of thousands of dollars in payments received. I opened customer communications and saw requests for specific activities, buyers asking Michael to film the kids in particular situations or clothing. Michael responding professionally, negotiating prices, promising delivery dates. This wasn't impulsive or accidental. This was calculated exploitation of our children by their own father, sustained over years, hidden behind normal family life. I heard Michael's footsteps on the stairs and closed the folders. He appeared in the office doorway asking if I'd found what I needed. I looked at my husband and saw a stranger. 12 years of marriage, 3 children together, thousands of shared memories, and I'd never known him at all. I asked him to sit down, keeping my voice neutral, trying not to tip him off that I knew. Michael said he had things to do and I should rest if I wasn't feeling well. I told him I needed him to sit down right now. Something in my tone made his face change, wariness creeping into his expression. He sat in the chair across from the desk and asked what was wrong. I asked him what he'd been doing with the camera equipment hidden around our house. Michael's face went carefully blank and he said he didn't know what I was talking about. I told him I'd found the folders, the videos, the transaction records, all of it. That I knew he'd been selling videos of our children to predators for years. Michael stood up immediately, his face flushing, and said I was being ridiculous and paranoid. I turned the computer monitor so he could see the folders open on the screen, the files clearly labeled with our children's names. Michael's mouth opened and closed without sound. He looked at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen. I asked him how long he'd been doing this, and he said nothing, just stared at the evidence of his crimes. I asked him why, and his eyes filled with tears, but he still didn't speak. I told him I was calling the police, and he finally found his voice, saying if I did that it would destroy our family, that the kids would be taken away, that we'd lose everything. I said he'd already destroyed our family and taken everything that mattered. Michael started crying harder, saying I didn't understand, that he'd needed the money, that I didn't make enough to support the lifestyle we wanted. I told him he'd sold our children's bodies to pedophiles for extra income, and that was unforgivable, regardless of financial pressures. Michael kept crying and saying he was sorry, that he'd stop, that it would never happen again, that we could work through this together. I picked up my phone and called 911. Michael lunged for it, but I stepped back, telling the dispatcher I needed police at our address immediately, that I'd discovered evidence of child exploitation. The dispatcher asked if any children were in immediate danger, and I said they were at school but their father was here and had been exploiting them. The dispatcher said officers were on the way and to stay on the line. Michael was screaming at me, saying I was ruining everything, that I was being dramatic, that the videos were harmless and the buyers just liked watching innocent content. I told him to stop talking because everything he said made it worse. He ran out of the office and I heard him in our bedroom, drawers opening and closing. I followed and found him throwing clothes into a suitcase. I asked what he thought he was doing and he said he was leaving, that he wouldn't sit here and let me destroy his life. I told him the police were coming and leaving would make him look guilty. Michael said he didn't care, that he'd explain everything to a lawyer, that I was overreacting and making assumptions. Police arrived 8 minutes later. I met them at the door while Michael was still upstairs packing. 2 officers, 1 male and 1 female, Officer Kevin Tran and Officer Lee Sutherland. I explained what I'd found and showed them to the computer. Officer Tran started photographing the screen while Officer Sutherland asked where Michael was. I sat upstairs packing a bag and Officer Sutherland went up to talk to him. I heard Michael's voice raised in protest, claiming this was a misunderstanding, that I was having some kind of mental break. Officer Sutherland's calm voice explaining that Michael needed to come downstairs and answer questions. Michael appeared a few minutes later with Officer Sutherland behind him, his face blotchy from crying. Officer Tran asked him if the computer was his and Michael said it was the family computer. He asked if the folders showing videos of children were his, and Michael said he wanted to talk to a lawyer. Officer Tran nodded and said that was his right, but that they were seizing the computer as evidence and he needed to come to the station for questioning. Michael said he wasn't going anywhere without his lawyer present. A detective arrived 30 minutes later, a woman in her 40s named Detective Isabel Ramsey, who specialized in child exploitation cases. She spent 15 minutes reviewing the computer files with a forensic tech who'd arrived to properly preserve the evidence. Then she came to talk to me in the living room where I'd been sitting in numb shock. Detective Ramsey asked me to walk through the timeline of how I'd discovered the videos, and I explained Natalie's text, the phone call, coming home and seeing the evidence myself. Detective Ramsey asked about Natalie and I gave her contact information. She asked how long Michael had access to the children alone, and I explained Michael worked from home as a software developer, that he had unlimited access while I worked at the firm. Detective Ramsey's expression was grim as she wrote notes. She asked if I'd noticed anything unusual about Michael's behavior or finances. I thought about the past few years and realized there had been signs I'd missed or rationalized. Michael buying expensive tech equipment he claimed was for work. Taking solo trips he said were conferences. Being protective of his laptop and phone in ways that seemed normal for privacy, but now felt suspicious. Detective Ramsey explained that what I'd found was evidence of child sexual abuse material production and distribution, federal crimes with severe penalties. She said based on the initial review of files, this appeared to be an organized operation that had been running for years. They'd need to forensically examine all devices, interview the children with specialized experts, and coordinate with federal investigators who handled these cases. She said I needed to pick up our kids from school immediately and take them somewhere safe, that Michael would be arrested today and wouldn't be coming home. I asked if the kids would have to know what Michael had done, and Detective Ramsey said eventually yes, but that child psychologist would help deliver that information in an age-appropriate way. She asked if I had family nearby who could help me, and I said my parents lived 20 minutes away. Detective Ramsey recommended I contact them, that I was going to need support through this. She gave me her card and said someone would call me tonight to arrange interviews with the children and discuss protective services. I called my parents from my car after leaving the house. My mother answered, and I tried to explain what had happened but couldn't get the words out without breaking down. Mom said they'd meet me at the elementary school and we'd figure everything out. I drove to the school and found my parents already in the parking lot. Mom hugged me while I cried against her shoulder and Dad asked what Michael had done. I told them about the videos and the sales and Dad actually went pale, shaking his head in disbelief. Mom said they'd help me with the kids, that we'd get through this together. We went inside together and signed out all 3 children early, telling the office there was a family emergency. The kids were confused but excited to leave school early, not understanding that their lives had just permanently changed. Emma asked where Dad was, and I said he had something to handle and wouldn't be home tonight. Caleb asked if we were going to Grandma and Grandpa's house, and I said yes, that we'd be staying there for a few days. At my parents' house, I tried to act normal while the kids played in the backyard. My mother made them snacks, and my father pulled me aside asking what happened next. I explained the police investigation, the forensic examination of devices, the interviews that would be scheduled. Dad asked if Michael would be charged, and I said definitely, that the evidence was overwhelming. He asked if I'd known anything about what he was doing, and I said absolutely not, that I was as shocked as anyone. Dad squeezed my shoulder and said he believed me, that nobody thought I was complicit. I asked him to watch the kids while I called my lawyer. I had an attorney who'd handled our real estate closings and estate planning, a woman named Patricia Kowalski, who I hoped could recommend a family law specialist. Patricia answered, and I explained the situation in clinical terms, trying to keep emotion out of it. Patricia was quiet for a long moment before saying this was beyond her expertise, but that she'd connect me with someone immediately. She called back 10 minutes later with a name, Diane Orozco, a family law attorney who specialized in protective custody cases. Diane Orozco answered her cell phone and listened without interrupting as I explained everything. When I finished, she said she'd take my case and that I needed to file for emergency custody and divorce immediately. That Michael's arrest would be public record and I needed to establish legally that I was protecting the children and had no knowledge of his crimes. Diane said she'd draft paperwork tonight and we'd file first thing in the morning. She also recommended I contact a child psychologist immediately to begin evaluating the kids for trauma. She gave me names of specialists who worked with abuse cases. I thanked her and hung up, feeling slightly less drowning. Detective Ramsey called that evening asking me to bring the children to a special interview facility the next day at 10 in the morning. She said experts would talk to each child separately using protocols designed to be minimally traumatic while gathering necessary information. She warned me that the questions would be explicit and difficult to hear but necessary for building the criminal case. I agreed and asked if Michael had been arrested. Detective Ramsey said yes, that Michael was being held without bail pending arraignment on federal charges. The next morning, I drove my 3 kids to a building called the Child Advocacy Center, a place designed to look friendly and unthreatening with bright colors and toys in the waiting room. A woman named Dr. Patricia Velasquez greeted us and explained she'd be talking to each child separately while I waited. The interviews would be recorded for evidence, but conducted in a comfortable setting with age-appropriate language. Caleb went first because he was oldest. He was gone for 40 minutes. When he came out, his face was pale and confused. He didn't want to talk about what they'd discussed. Emma went next, clutching a stuffed animal Dr. Velasquez had given her. She was gone for 50 minutes and came out crying. Lucas was last, clearly scared but trying to be brave. He was gone for 35 minutes. When all 3 were done, Dr. Velasquez asked to speak with me privately. She explained that all 3 children had confirmed being filmed without their knowledge, that they'd discovered cameras in their rooms and bathroom at various times, but Michael had told them the cameras were for security and not to worry about them. Dr. Velasquez said the children showed signs of confusion and betrayal, but not necessarily awareness that the videos had been sold or used for exploitation. Michael had normalized the surveillance enough that the kids hadn't understood it was wrong. Dr. Velasquez said this was actually protective because it meant the children hadn't carried shame or fear around the filming, but they'd need extensive therapy to process the betrayal when they fully understood what their father had done. She recommended a trauma specialist named Dr. Bernard Nkomo, who worked specifically with child exploitation victims. I took his information and thanked Dr. Velasquez for her gentleness with my kids. She said they were resilient and would heal with proper support, that they were lucky to have a mother who'd acted immediately to protect them. I didn't feel lucky. I felt like I'd failed to notice for years that my husband was exploiting our children. The forensic examination of Michael's devices revealed the scope of his operation. He'd been producing and selling content for 5 years, starting when Emma was 3. He'd had over 300 customers in that time, mostly in the United States but some international. He'd made approximately $180,000 total, money he'd hidden in cryptocurrency accounts I'd never known existed. The federal prosecutor handling the case, a woman named Alexis Feldman, called me to explain the charges. Michael was facing 15 counts of sexual exploitation of children, each count carrying a minimum sentence of 15 years. Additional charges for distribution, conspiracy, and money laundering. Alexis said if convicted on all counts, Michael could face over 200 years in federal prison. I asked what Michael's defense would be, and Alexis said probably mental illness or coercion by unknown parties. But the evidence of deliberate systematic operation over 5 years made those defenses weak. The arraignment happened 3 days after Michael's arrest. I attended with Diane, sitting in the back of the courtroom while Michael was brought in wearing prison scrubs and handcuffs. He looked smaller than I remembered, diminished somehow. The judge read the charges, and Michael's court-appointed attorney entered a plea of not guilty. The prosecutor asked for Michael to be held without bail, arguing he was a danger to children and a flight risk. Michael's attorney argued he had no criminal record and strong community ties. The judge looked at the file for a long moment before ruling that given the severity of charges and the evidence of systematic exploitation, Michael would be held without bail pending trial. Michael didn't react, just stood silently as the judge set a preliminary hearing date. As he was being let out, he looked back at the gallery and our eyes met. I saw something in his face that might have been regret or might have been resentment. I couldn't tell anymore. The emergency custody hearing happened the same day. Diane presented evidence of Michael's arrest and charges, arguing I needed sole legal and physical custody to protect the children from further harm. Michael's attorney didn't contest the request, acknowledging that Michael's circumstances made shared custody impossible. The judge granted my motion immediately, ordering that Michael have no contact with the children pending resolution of the criminal case. Outside the courthouse, Diane told me this was the easy part, that the divorce proceedings would take months and be complicated by the criminal case. that Michael might try to negotiate custody or visitation as part of a plea deal. I said there was no universe where Michael would see our children again, and Diane said she agreed, but that the legal system sometimes forced compromises I wouldn't like. She recommended I document everything, maintain records of the children's therapy, and prepare for Michael's family to possibly challenge the custody arrangement. Michael's parents called me that night. His father Arnold was angry and accusatory, saying I must have known what was happening, that I was trying to destroy Michael's life. His mother Diane was crying and saying there must be a misunderstanding, that Michael wouldn't hurt children. I told them the evidence was overwhelming and public record if they wanted to see it. Arnold said the police had fabricated evidence and I was complicit. I hung up on him. 30 minutes later, Michael's sister Melissa called, her tone more measured. She said she'd seen some of the discovery documents through Michael's attorney and she was horrified. She asked if the kids were okay and I said they were in therapy. Melissa said she wanted to maintain a relationship with the kids if I was comfortable with that. She didn't excuse what Michael had done, but she was still their aunt. I said I'd think about it, that right now I was focused on keeping the kids stable. Melissa understood and said she'd check in later. Dr. Nkomo started therapy with all 3 kids immediately. He met with each child individually twice a week and with me weekly to discuss their progress. He explained that Caleb, as the oldest, was struggling most with understanding why his father had violated their trust. Emma was displaying anxiety about being watched and had started changing clothes in the closet with the door locked. Lucas was too young to fully understand but was having nightmares about cameras. Dr. Nkomo said all of these responses were normal and would improve with time and consistent therapy. He asked me to remove all electronics from their bedrooms, to let them choose new stuffed animals and decorations so they could reclaim their spaces. He said rebuilding their sense of safety would take months but was achievable. I followed every recommendation, turning their rooms into spaces they controlled, letting them choose paint colors and furniture arrangements. Emma picked purple and demanded a lock on her door. I installed one that could be opened from outside in emergencies, but gave her control over her space. The preliminary hearing revealed more details I'd rather not have known. The prosecution presented evidence that Michael had been active in online communities of child exploitation producers and consumers. He'd traded content with other parents who were exploiting their own children. He'd taken custom requests from buyers and filmed the kids in specific scenarios they'd requested. The transcripts of his communications were nauseating, showing Michael negotiating prices and discussing children as products. The defense attorney argued that much of the evidence was circumstantial and that someone else might have had access to Michael's accounts. The judge found probable cause on all charges and scheduled the trial for 6 months out. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked me questions about whether I'd known what Michael was doing. I said nothing and kept walking. Diane had advised me not to make any public statements that could be used against me later. The media coverage was intense for a few days, then died down when other stories emerged. The discovery process revealed that one of Michael's customers was a teacher at Caleb's elementary school, a man named Jeffrey Holbrook who'd been buying videos of Caleb specifically for 2 years. The school district was horrified and suspended him immediately pending investigation. Police arrested him and found his computer filled with illegal content, including the videos Michael had sold him. Jeffrey's arrest led to investigations of other teachers and staff at the school. 2 more employees were found to have inappropriate content on their devices, though not connected to Michael's operation. The school district fired all 3 and issued statements about enhanced background checks and monitoring. I pulled all 3 kids out of that school and enrolled them in a different district across town. The new school was aware of our situation and worked with Dr. Nkomo to ensure the kids had appropriate support and privacy. 6 months after Michael's arrest, the trial began. It lasted 3 weeks with extensive testimony from FBI agents who'd analyzed Michael's computer and financial records, from customers who'd been arrested and agreed to testify in exchange for reduced sentences, and from Dr. Velasquez describing her interviews with the children. I attended every day, sitting behind the prosecution table, forcing myself to hear every detail. Michael's defense was that he'd been coerced by a girlfriend I'd never known about, that he'd been in an abusive relationship with a woman who'd threatened his family if he didn't produce content. The prosecution demolished this theory by showing Michael's communications where he clearly initiated sales and actively recruited customers. They showed his careful bookkeeping and business planning. They showed his shopping for camera equipment and researching how to hide devices effectively. This wasn't coercion. This was entrepreneurship. The jury deliberated for 8 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all 15 counts. Sentencing happened a month later. The judge allowed victim impact statements, and I read one describing what Michael had stolen from our children: their sense of safety, their trust in their father, years of childhood innocence, describing the nightmares and therapy sessions and Emma's fear of being watched, describing Caleb's confusion about why his father had hurt him, describing Lucas asking why Daddy went away. Michael sat at the defense table crying, but I felt nothing watching him. He'd destroyed our family for money. Whatever consequences he faced were consequences he'd earned. The judge sentenced Michael to 225 years in federal prison, the sentences to run consecutively. Michael would die in prison. He'd never see our children again. As Michael was led away, he looked back at me one final time. I didn't look away. I wanted him to see that I felt no pity, no forgiveness, only cold satisfaction that justice had been served. The civil lawsuit I filed against Michael's customers who'd been identified and arrested settled quickly. Most of them paid substantial amounts to avoid trial and additional publicity. The money went into trust funds for each child's therapy and future education. The largest settlement came from Jeffrey Holbrook's family, who paid $300,000 to avoid their son's crimes becoming more public than they already were. I felt no guilt taking their money. They'd raised a predator who targeted my son. They could pay for the damage. The school district also settled for their negligent hiring and supervision practices, paying $200,000. Combined with the seizure of Michael's cryptocurrency accounts, there was enough money to ensure the kids would have resources for therapy and college. Financial security couldn't undo what Michael had done, but it meant the kids wouldn't suffer additional hardship because of his choices. 3 years after Michael's conviction, life had found a different version of normal. Caleb was 13 and doing well academically, but struggled with trusting men in authority positions. Emma was 11 and had developed an interest in privacy advocacy, writing essays about children's rights for school projects. Lucas was 9 and the most resilient, possibly because he'd been youngest when everything happened. All 3 were still in therapy but functioning well. Dr. Nkomo said their progress was excellent considering the trauma they'd survived. They knew their father was in prison, but I'd never explained exactly why, just that he'd made very bad choices that hurt people. Dr. Nkomo said when they were older they'd need to know the full truth, but for now general knowledge was enough. I'd started dating again cautiously, a man named David who worked at the kids' school and knew our history. He was patient with my protectiveness and careful boundaries around the children. Michael sent letters periodically from prison. I burned them unopened. He had no right to contact us, no right to ask for forgiveness or understanding. Diane confirmed that Michael couldn't legally contact the children without my permission, which I'd never give. Michael's parents had sued for grandparent visitation rights but lost when evidence of their ongoing denial about Michael's crimes was presented. The judge ruled that maintaining relationship with people who refused to acknowledge the harm Michael caused would be damaging to the children's recovery. Arnold and Diane stopped trying after that. Melissa maintained occasional contact, sending birthday cards and careful messages that acknowledged what Michael had done while expressing love for the kids. I allowed supervised video calls twice a year. The kids seemed to appreciate having one connection to Michael's family who didn't pretend nothing had happened. The advocacy work I'd become involved with felt meaningful. I joined organizations fighting child exploitation and lobbying for stronger laws around home surveillance and online privacy. I'd testified before state legislature about the need for better monitoring of parents who exhibited concerning online behavior. The laws that passed wouldn't undo what happened to my kids, but they might protect other children whose parents were beginning to see them as monetizable assets. Emma attended some of these events with me, wanting to be involved in preventing what happened to her from happening to others. She was remarkably mature about it, turning her trauma into purpose. Dr. Nkomo said that transformation was healthy and showed resilience. She'd need to be careful not to let advocacy consume her childhood, but channeling pain into positive action was better than many alternatives. Caleb was less interested in public advocacy, but had started a blog about privacy rights that had gained surprising readership. Lucas mostly just wanted to play soccer and video games, which Dr. Nkomo said was perfect. Not every trauma survivor needed to become an activist. 5 years after I found Natalie's text, I was picking up the kids from school when I saw Michael's sister Melissa in the parking lot. She waved hesitantly and walked over to my car. I hadn't seen her in person for years. She asked how the kids were doing and I gave her brief updates. Then she said something I hadn't expected. Michael had asked her to ask me if I'd consider letting the kids visit him in prison. Melissa said she wasn't advocating for it, just passing along the request. I said absolutely not, that Michael had no right to ask for access to the children he'd exploited. Melissa nodded and said she'd expected that answer but had promised Michael she'd ask. She added quietly that Michael had tried to kill himself twice in prison and was in psychiatric care. I felt nothing hearing that. Whatever pain Michael was experiencing was nothing compared to what he'd put our children through. Melissa understood. She said she'd tell Michael there would be no visits and no future requests would be entertained. When I told the kids about Michael's request, their reactions were telling. Caleb said he never wanted to see him. Emma said maybe someday when she was older, but not now. Lucas asked why Dad had gone away in the first place. I'd never fully explained, had kept it age-appropriate. But he was 10 now and deserved to know. I told all 3 kids together what Michael had done, that he'd put cameras in their rooms and bathrooms, that he'd sold videos of them to bad people, that he'd hurt them for money. The kids were quiet, processing. Then Emma asked if I'd known, and I said absolutely not, that I'd stopped it the moment I'd found out. Caleb asked if the bad people had been caught, and I said yes, many of them had been arrested. Lucas asked if that's why we moved schools and changed houses, and I said yes, we'd started over somewhere safe. The conversation was hard but necessary. Dr. Nkomo had said they'd need the truth eventually. 5 years felt like eventually. A decade after Michael's arrest, I stood in the audience watching Emma give a TEDx talk about children's privacy rights in the digital age. She was 18, about to start college, confident and articulate. She talked about her experience as a survivor without giving details that would identify her, discussing the long-term impacts of exploitation and the importance of legal frameworks to protect children. The audience gave her a standing ovation. Caleb, now 20, attended with his girlfriend, recording the talk on his phone. Lucas, 16, sat next to me quietly proud of his sister. After the talk, Emma found us and we all went to dinner together, laughing and celebrating. Nobody mentioned Michael. He'd become an absence, a shadow we'd learned to live around. The man who'd nearly destroyed our family had been erased from our daily lives. What remained was the family we'd rebuilt, imperfect, scarred, but real, and safe, and ours. The babysitter's text had shattered one life and saved another. A decade later, I finally understood we'd survived. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.